Called them cremation crumbs, didn't you?
Cremation.
Nan crumbs.
Oh,
But,
beautiful.
you know, they don't look like a lot of people expect them to look.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you know, you can give people the permission to be delighted by such things. It's not always imbued with terrible, terrifying grief.
Yes.
There's curiosity that's allowed. There's humour that's allowed. There's playfulness that's allowed. There's joy.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. What if creativity is the secret to us making peace with death? Whether it's pouring our creativity into rituals, art, and memory making with those in their final chapter at the end of life, or planning for funerals and continued connections after they're gone, or in our own planning for our final days and funeral. Could creative expression be the key to stepping through our fears into a reawakening of our innate connection with death? My guests today are proving just this, in such a playful, joyful, creative, and humorous way that doesn't shy away from the pain, the fear, the panic, and the grief, and so much more that these topics understandably bring up. These two sisters open up the door to a topic that is just so avoided in our society, inviting us to gently step through and explore our own mortality at our pace, meeting ourselves exactly where we are and honoring whatever it brings up within us. Katy and Lindsey Vigurs are the Dead Good Sisters, creative death workers and arts-based educators. And what I've really taken away from our chat is just how important community, continued conversation, and creativity are in our ongoing rebuilding of our relationship with death, and how these tools can help us to not only prepare for our inevitable end, but to truly come alive in the process. So Lindsey and Katy, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Oh, it's wonderful to be in this space with you and to have your creative force coming into the space of Death on the Daily. Now, both of your journeys began as for all of us within the grief space, it's really inspired by our own journeys with grief. So I'd love for us to start there, just with you both sharing anything that you wish to about your story.
Yeah, so we usually start when we're introducing ourselves. It's really hard not to mention our dad. So it's also worth mentioning that Lindsey and I were dabbling in the death space a few years before our dad got sick. But it was very much a sort of side project for us. We both had full-time work and lives back then. But what really focused us was Dad being given a stage 4 bowel cancer diagnosis, which was in January 2021. And I think, you know, we're, in terms of our background as a family, our dad is a very musical, nature-loving museums man and art galleries man. And Mum is a very green-fingered librarian. So we were raised in a very open and creative family, just kind of to give a bit of explanation for where some of our approach comes from. But what happened was we found out that Dad had about 12 months to live. And it was a bit of a shock. But pretty quickly, we worked with Mum and Dad to have a creative response to that final year, and to be coming up with ideas ourselves, but also to be listening quite hard to Dad and how Dad was processing and experiencing, you know, what he knew to be his final year. And I'm sure we'll get, I'd like Linz to give some of her sort of thoughts and experiences as well. But Dad said it was the best year of his life.
Oh,
And so I think that's quite kind of annoying on the one hand, but it's, but it's like, don't wait. Have your best year every year.
It's a great lesson.
But it is a great lesson. And I'm also really, really glad that we were able to sort of surrender to, not to be panicked by that last year. And we also know it's not available to everyone. So we're really mindful that it's kind of a privilege to be given that time and to be able to respond. But I think it was good for us as well as for Dad that we had a range of ways, like creative responses to his, impending death. And that kept us present in that year. But it also was a way to hold space for Dad and for ourselves, but it was a way to process so I speak for myself in that regard. But for me, it was a really manageable way to handle anticipatory grief.
Yeah. There's a line from Succession, the TV show, where Kieran Culkin says he's fine about his dad's death and he's pre-grieved, which is sort of a funny term that gets bandied around now. But I do think that's, again, I'll speak for myself, but I think that's what I was doing. And I think it was accidentally really healthy. We didn't plan it to be like wholesome and beneficial. We were planning things on the hoof in the midst of, albeit not panicked grief, but grief and grieving, but being sort of grateful for every day, at the same time as knowing there was a finite timing on it. So it was like, I think good is like a really good word for it, even though it feels like such a sort of simple word. But that good encompasses a huge range of emotions. Because I wouldn't want to like not refer to how difficult some of that time was. And the kind of, the active dying process to witness was really hard. And because it's very different to talk about it when you're not in that space anymore, because you can see the whole timeline as it played out. When you're within that time of expected death, you have no idea how long that's going to last. And so, there was some absolute joy in that last 12 months where Dad was, kind of coming out of chemo, still quite well. And really that lasted up until the Christmas was when I felt he looked different. And it was at we planned we planned some great things in. Our mum and dad kept going away for weekends right up until I think maybe the November, and kind of getting closer and closer to home and always having to figure out how well or not he was. So it was very active. And in the December, we planned like a reunion for his old school friends from South London. And they all came up to Stoke and gathered in a place where our dad was a volunteer, which is an industrial museum in Etruria, like a bone mill.
Oh, wow.
It's a really special place, and our dad loved it and was a volunteer there. So we took a room or two, and they had a tour, and we prepared like a homemade meal, and it was delightful. It was absolutely delightful. And I've got some of it on film, but I can't really watch it because our dad was quite emotional, which is unusual for him. So he knew the significance of all of this as it was happening, but he was so calm and agreeable with it all, which now looking back is like super special. But the photos from that, it was like, okay, something different is happening now. He looked drawn in a way that I don't think he had. He did, yeah. And he'd always been quite a kind of a a plump, jovial
Big,
man.
like tall, big.
Yeah, tall and big. And he had sort of somehow shrunk. His clothing all looked too big. So it really marked a decline in his health. But again, it's like, will this decline last for 6 months? You know, and it was very difficult to, as an autistic person, uncertainty, not knowing when something is going to end is incredibly hard. And I think I found that the hardest to deal with of all the things. Like, things can be really difficult for me. And if I know it's going to be 10 minutes or an hour or even a few days, then that makes it kind of copable with, but without an end in sight. And you're not wishing for that to come. You're not wishing for, you know, a kind of a premature ending, of course, but it's just very difficult to know. And the people who were supporting us couldn't really, and maybe shouldn't, you know, give us a perspective on that. So that was very difficult. But really, in hindsight, again, sorry, Katie, looking back on it, was a really small period of time. You know, it was a couple of weeks really that it was very difficult for. And again, looking back and knowing what we know from our work now is again that's a very privileged, expected end, and difficult, and yet still privileged.
Yeah. Can I respond to a couple of the things that Lynn's just raised?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's really interesting to hear my sister talk, like, because even though we work together every day, we're not doing this kind of talk every day, and especially not about our own, not in this amount of detail. So it's I'm really grateful to have the chance to do this. So listening back, so Dad, he was planning for this reunion with his school friends of 60 years. And we didn't term it as a living funeral, but that's kind of there were aspects of that last meeting with his school friends where they were sort of honouring him and honouring their relationships and friendship that I think certainly would be relatable to aspects of a living funeral or a living wake. And what I can see now is that Dad was wholly focused on that. I really think the planning, the prepping, the making decisions, I think that kept him going as well. Because once that was over, it was actually quite a quick transition for him to suddenly not driving, not walking, not leaving the house. That all happened
not wearing trousers
almost overnight. It was quite interesting. Well, we can't prove any of that, but that's how it seemed.
Wow.
And also, I want to say something about panic, because I think, if I'm being truthful, some of my responses to that Dad in his final year was driven by panic for me personally. The kind of impetus to record conversations with Dad. So I recorded 50 audio conversations with Dad in that last year. It became almost like a compulsion. And then because I was very aware that physically he wouldn't be here at some point soon. And the thought of not being able to hear Dad, and also to have lost some of those stories. He was great for telling the same stories over and over again. And so it almost got to the point where you just humour that, but then you weren't listening, you weren't carefully listening to the details. And so I suddenly became aware that if I didn't record some of these things now, they'd be lost. And I wanted to do that for myself, but I wanted to do it for our children as well. So there was, again, it sounds really planned out when we talk about it like that, but it wasn't. It was like an instinct. And the same with casting his hands, so making almost like sprig molds of his hands, which again were a really important part of his identity and our relationship with him. I was aware the physical body was going to go, and we knew that he we weren't getting ashes back because he had a natural burial. So I wanted something physically that would still trace or was traceable to Dad. And, you know, we say this quite a lot when we're talking in public, but one of the things we did was we made the handprints in clay so that they can go up in our houses so we can still high-five him.
I love high-fiving him.
Mine's in my hallway, so he doesn't get a high five every day, but it gets a high five. I love it.
And I like just slipping
I also
my
want
hand.
to play. I wouldn't have done most of these things if I'd been an only child.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have thought to record conversations. I wouldn't have thought to do the handprints. So we teamed it again in an instinctual way or an instinctive way, and our mum as well, and the way that she archived and like collected and collated. So yeah, it was a real Team Vigurs year.
Oh, that Team Vigurs year is so beautiful. I mean, thank you both for sharing so much around obviously the wholesomeness of that year, as well as obviously the understandable pain, the grief, the panic, the wholeness of our human existence, isn't it? That acknowledgement. But I loved as well that you ended there with that, the power of that connection, because we live in such an individualistic world and where death and grief is so pushed into the shadows and away from conversation. To your point, if you're navigating on your own, whether that's because you're only child or for any other circumstances, there can be, I suppose, a lack of that, I'm going to say creative expansion, very much inspired by the energy of you both, but that creative expansion. And you both got me thinking actually about the fact that for me in baby loss and how I was really privileged to be in a group of fellow end of life doulas we just trained, but two of them having had stillbirths. And actually it was them who said, have you thought about this? Here's some creative ideas of what you can do to honor your daughter. And that just again expanded me and made me go, oh wow, okay, there's things now that I can do that I never would have done otherwise. So you've also really rooted me into that power of connection, whether it's within our families or with other people.
Oh yeah, well, that's it. It was to say that is an important part of our work as death educators and people in the death space is that I personally sometimes am biased into thinking this person won't want this advice because they'll already know it. But that's that is a bias on my point that is almost never true. So giving people a few gentle starting points when they feel a little bit stuck, or perhaps when they're sort of frozen or floundering even with grief, wherever point they're at with grief in the timeline, is almost always welcomed and transformative. And it's sort of something around permission to do things in a different way than perhaps have been done perhaps for, decades or centuries even. Or it can be because we've been able to get a kind of connection and understanding of that person and what's meaningful to them. Or maybe their set of circumstances, which means they are sort of disenfranchised from their family or group or whoever, and they need to do something that's personal and solo. Having those other people, and specifically people who are perhaps doulas or experienced in death care, can provide something else. And that's such a lovely thing to be able to do. And it can make just a huge amount of difference. Like you said, those few words from people who were trained, who you had already got a connection with, who understood what you were going through from a personal perspective, and as educators and doulas. And even though you're there yourself, it's such a completely different place to occupy when you're in that rawness.
I think it's important for us to say that we're not trained death doulas, and we're not trained counsellors or psychologists, but we believe strongly that the work that we do and facilitate is therapeutic. I mean, the more and more we work with people, like alongside people, to me, I'm trying to connect more as a human being, a fellow human being. So we certainly don't have recipe approaches to, it's very much human being to human being, a lot of listening, and then almost reflecting back. And I can, we try to give lots of examples of the ways that we've worked with our own family, and like not just our dad, our nan has died since our dad died. So we've got our own personal layering of ways of being around grief, but then also being able to talk about different approaches with different families without, giving too many details about those families, but being able to explain where those ideas came from. And they always come from the family. It's just sometimes people need ways into those ways of imagining and thinking, and almost like reawakening rather than it be, do you know what I mean? It's there. You just have to help create the space for the ideas and the imagination to grow or expand. And I think that's what's really powerful. And like, we're not the only people who do this work, but the work, it's really enjoyable work, because you don't know, when you meet a family or a group of friends or an individual, you have no idea where this connection is going to go, but it always goes somewhere, and I would say it's always right for them at that time.
Oh, Katy, creating that space for the ideas and the imagination to grow. And you're right, I love that. It's that reawakening, because it's true. It's not a new space for people to go into. It's the essence of us as humans. Before we started recording, we were talking about that, the nature connection that we all have. We are humans of nature. This is innate into us. And for you both, because death and grief education is so, so important. And I would love to dive into, well, obviously we as a society, we've disconnected from death and it's doing us a lot of harm. Where is that starting point? So if someone's tuning into this podcast and they perhaps haven't thought about death, perhaps they haven't thought about to that point of around your dad's final year, and actually the creativity that went into that, and it was really led by him. For someone who is at the starting point of their journey, what would you suggest? Where could they start in reawakening themselves?
So I do have like an immediate thought on that, which is, because it can be it can be scary, and it can be so many emotions can come when you suddenly then do confront your mortality, or the mortality of people that are important to you. Some difficult stuff can come up too. But I think our approach is always to start light and playful. And that's not right for everybody, but it's for the people who come to us, it's often the way that people feel comfortable. And I'm certainly not meaning like glib and making fun of death. It's certainly not that. But I think because we've done the work ourselves to become, more comfortable with being mortal beings, we can talk about that. I think the feedback we get from people is that we're very calm when we're talking about our own deaths and dying and possible funerals and those kind of things. So I think it's a sort of gentle role modeling, just being around us. But then when we are creating spaces where people can actually, decide to come and engage with this sort of thinking, we often create activities that stimulate creative conversation, that allow people to do a tiny little bit of the work, just a tiny little bit. And what we found is that that's often all it takes for people to then, it doesn't mean it comes in a flood for them, but it means there's a slight opening, and that they take it at their own pace. So we would never want to force anyone that they have to think about this stuff. But when we're out publicly, we're always very clear that for most people, it's actually quite a liberating thing. Once the panic, because I think that's what fear and panic is probably the strongest emotion if people haven't thought about mortality before. Once that's been held and and allowed, it's it's not bad, it's okay. But then looking at just tiny different approaches. Linz, what are some of the things that we've done like in public? So the gravestones.
Yeah, we've both done make your own gravestone workshop. But not in like carving your headstone, although that would be cool. I watch the space for that.
Love that.
It's been sort of small wooden
Wow.
stones that you can decorate. We use them for our sort of merch tables if we do a market. But the one that I led was collage your own gravestone or a gravestone. And using text from magazines and things that people had to kind of cut up and gluing and sticking and adding paint and stuff. But by using, for me, always going sideways really helps me to get into things. So instead of having to like sort of think of words and write them on with your hand, finding opportune bits of text from magazines to create a sort of a poem or a phrase or something. It's almost like, I don't know, you're creating it, but it also is creating itself in a way. So that's always a really fun, slightly weird thing to do, especially in like a public space where you've got these kind of, myriad people, children, old people, everyone, just anyone sitting down, making tiny gravestones. But it's creative. So, and you're busy and your brain is occupying a space of finding textures and colors and words and it's busy on a grief activity without being immersed in sadness, panic, and fear.
And in the company of others.
Yeah, in the company of others who are doing it themselves and having little chats about this and that. And sometimes you're just having chat about Pritt Stick. And then sometimes you're talking about a death that might have happened 30 years ago that is still feels unresolved. And, there's a lot of sadness around it, or even recent suicides. All kinds of things come up in that space, but in a very, I think, sort of neurodivergent supporting way. And in a way that a death cafe can sometimes be exactly right for some people, but maybe too confronting for others. So these kind of our arts-based approach to death work is just right for some people. And probably more people than who would have thought it was. Yeah, so that's a good example. Like when you asked the question, my mind went far more practical in that I really want people to make wills. And, even though that probably isn't the easiest way to get into, kind of talking about your mortality, it's one of the most important things I think we can do as humans in advance of, and ideally to do it when we're much younger than we think we ought to be. So yeah, so I and we are on a bit of a mission really to sort of incentivize will making, maybe even to gamify it if that's what needs to happen. We've started the kind of party so that people can do it again with each other in a group of, I don't know, safety. I've done it with my friends. We had drinks and snacks, and Katy came and facilitated it for us. And it's still confronting and difficult, but we have resources to get people on their way for thinking about their funerals and that kind of thing. And we design them like comics and like zines and there's a slight punk attitude to our visuals and our wording and the way that we show up. But again, that's just right for some people, and we find that it helps them to edge their way into things. But quite soon after people have edged their way in, I'm like, make a will, make a will, make a will, make a will, make a will.
Yeah, you open that door and then push the will through it, because it is so important. Is that your Get Mortal parties? Is that
Yes.
Oh my god, I love again that punk spirit. I absolutely love, because for me a name like that is, I think, even me in a past life prior to me leaning into the death and grief space, I think that would have made me, oh, that's interesting. Or like that, yeah, design your own headstone. It's really, really beautiful, because actually what I can hear is you're giving that channel for, because there is so much avoidance. And in my experience as well, for example, when I was writing the birth and death plan for my daughter before we went into hospital for her stillbirth, I really sat with my avoidance, and then realized as soon as my words were flowing onto the page, it just melted away. And by the time I'd finished it, I felt like I'd had, I don't know, an elephant's worth of weight just lifted from my chest. I felt so much lighter. Do you witness that as well when you sit in community with people who you're facilitating these parties and other workshops and experiences for? Do you see that shift in people?
Yeah, it's palpable, isn't it? You can feel it. And sometimes it feels quite like heightened. There's almost like an electric releasing something. Like I can feel that coming off people and myself in those spaces. So like we need quite a lot of like downtime and and sort of processing time afterwards, because it's big. And like Tanya, you were saying when you were writing the birth and death plan, how ultimately brilliant that was for you, but how much avoidance you experienced from other people around that, and how people expect the birth plan, but were kind of almost, I don't know, didn't know how to react to the fact that you'd done this preparation for yourself, and almost maybe that you felt so positive about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as well. I think even in the will space, if I think about, for example, I remember having conversations when it was my grandparents bought their burial plots, and I remember witnessing, like, it was either my parents or my aunts, I can't remember who, being like, oh, no, almost like trying to be like, no, you don't need that. We don't need to talk about this. But it's like, yeah, we do. So I could imagine even in that space, if I was to have a conversation in a lot of my family and be like, oh, yeah, I'm just doing my will, I could imagine the response again would be that, oh, what, you don't, let's not go there. And it's almost that protection, but it's not protecting the person, is it?
No, people still think it's morbid, and that it will welcome death in.
Yes.
Bring it quicker.
Yes. It's like it's contagious as soon as you mention death. Yeah,
it is. That's a big thing. And so, again, we try to lead by example. We've both done wills. Katie's done even more than me and has built it back into our work, so that as dead good, it really is our responsibility to do it for ourselves because it's just a good idea, but also to practice what we're preaching. So Katie has done her lasting power of attorney.
Yeah, so for future care and also for finances. So again, when you're working in this landscape, obviously we've all got friends who, and colleagues who know a lot more than we do about the certain specific aspects. But then having gone through that ourselves, we can then sort of say to people, like, either it's less money than you think, or it takes less time than you think. And I'm not ashamed to say that the lasting power of attorney had been on my very important things to do for, I think, 10 years. I'm certainly not saying we've been efficient at this stuff, but I think now that we are practitioners in this space, it's really important that we don't just say a lot of things that are good ideas and then not do them ourselves. So and I did that at the end of last year. And again, it gives me some peace of mind that should I, I mean, the lasting power of attorney is for before you're dead, but perhaps you can't advocate for yourself. And that's not just around dementia and things like that. That's around you have an accident and you, you're in a coma, or you're, something where you can't communicate. Then, who's going to speak for you? And going through that process philosophically was quite deep, but the process itself was quite simple.
Wow. And that just shows.
I still need to do that. And, at the end of last year, I was really seriously ill. And, things like life is chaotic and there's no warning a lot of the time. So, feeling like we only need these things as we get into our advanced years is like, it's not true. Statistically, the longer you live, the closer you are to dying, but we all will, and none of us know how. So I was in hospital, in and out of hospital for the last part of 2024. And at one point it looked really bad, really, really bad. And we were unsure whether I was going to be sedated and put into intensive care. And at the time I remember just thinking, oh no, this is disappointing, I'm going to die. But very, very quickly coming to terms with it, but feeling that I absolutely didn't want to, and that it was very disappointing.
Oh, wow.
And I asked everyone in the hospital not to let me die.
Wow.
So I am still processing a lot of this. And it makes me, so I had a little bit of a crisis really when I came out for the final time, which was just after Christmas. And there was a lot going on. Our nan had died while I was in hospital. And but I almost wanted to get all this stuff done within the next few days because I felt the absence of an updated will, because we'd just moved house. I felt the absence of like end of life care plan for myself, so a death plan. I felt the absence of lasting power of attorney. So my partner and I, we live together. We live with my children from a different relationship. In legal terms, we're not even next of kin.
Wow.
And he physically was there to advocate for me while I was unwell and not able to talk about what I wanted or needed. And he knows me well enough to be able to do that. But legally, he's not my next of kin.
Wow.
Unless we're married, which we aren't, and unless we note that down somewhere and have it made official. So there are these things that are, again, worth talking about, worth knowing about, and I give myself sort of leave to have not done those things yet, because I am still processing what was a really heavy experience. But again, as part of our work, like every time in hospital I'd say that I was a death worker, we'd all just laugh for like too long because we all knew how close I was to dying. And it felt sort of ridiculous and ironic, but also it deepens my ability to work in this space, because it's not a near-death experience in those sort of same terms, although some weird stuff really happened. It gave me a real inkling into things can change really fast. And at that point, the crisis is the worst time to then have to put these things in place. So yeah, as we go deeper into this work, the more I'm going to want to do it for myself, and then to talk to other people and implore them and somehow incentivize them to doing it for themselves. And to hope that is something that we can make a change for, for people our age and younger.
And that's why the education side and like the public conversation is such a massive part of our current work as Dead Good, because we firmly believe that having the conversations before a crisis is just good planning for just good for everyone. And that's why we're in libraries and farmers markets and cafes and, you know, all over the place.
People spaces.
Yeah.
It's not just not
It's
death
not,
spaces.
we're not, a lot of our work has not been at death-related events. It's been quite the opposite. It's very living events. Everyday life, you know, activities and events. And then we're there with all our, you know, coffins, shrouds, planning, zines. And it's been a surprisingly effective way. I can't tell you how scared I was the first one that we ever set up. I suddenly thought, it was at an arts market, and I just thought, is this a really bad judgment call? But by the end of that market, I just thought, no, it's the really right judgment call, because everybody's got a story that they feel they can share with you, or they've got a question. So, you know, it's never, whenever we're publicly out there in person, you're only ever one question away from someone asking, but how long does a body take to decompose in a natural way? Yeah, like people feel they can ask what they probably wouldn't say. And
people will self-select. So some people cannot be physically around the stall, and that's okay. You know, we don't want to force people to do it. But I will have things when I have a stand that are quite confrontational. So one of my questions is, would you like to see cremated remains? Because again, there's so much sort of hidden and like maybe forbidden or distasteful or shameful. I don't know, lots of things, lots of feelings. And I think it's really important to have the option to see, or have the offer to see something like that, because it takes a lot of the heat and emotion and grief and fear, largely fear of it. So I've got some here right now. Would you like to see them?
Yes, very much.
You should say what they are before you show.
It's a tiny vial of my nan's ashes that I interred a couple of weeks ago with my mum. But when you're interring ashes, like when you're tipping anything out of a receptacle, there's tiny bits left behind, like in the paper bag is what ours was in from the crematorium. So I undid the paper bag and got every tiny last like little mote of dust. So, and I put them into a tiny little vial, and I just have them near me. Would you like to see?
I would love to. I feel so honoured.
And I did put a tiny little label on there.
Nan. What's your nan? What was your nan's? And I'm missing she's nan.
Dorothy.
And what's your dad's name as well? Just to bring his name.
Peter. Yeah.
Oh,
so I'm going to hold it to my camera.
You called them cremation crumbs, didn't you?
Cremation
nan crumbs.
Oh, beautiful.
But, you know, they don't look like a lot of people expect them to look. And I don't know, you know, you can give people the permission to be delighted by such things. It's not always imbued with terrifying grief.
Yes.
There's curiosity that's allowed. There's humour that's allowed. There's playfulness that's allowed. There's joy.
Oh, there's joy.
There's joy.
I love that curiosity, the playfulness and the joy. And we think how many of those conversations, they get shut down when we're kids and we're curious about death, and there's no space for that. I love that. I feel like that is a beautiful place. We need to close out this conversation now, just mindful of your time. But I'm feeling that playfulness, that curiosity, that joy, and actually the space that you're both opening up to allow people to have those conversations. I've got an image in my head of people who might walk past your stand a few times and be edged their way in, and then eventually ask that question that has just always been just in the back of their mind.
That's exactly what happens. So if you're in regular places, so you'll see people see it's a coffin, walk quickly past, but then you'll see them a month later and they'll come in and they'll just have a little look, but they don't want to talk. And then a month later, they sort of want to ask something or share something. So again, it's just an example of how important it is that the people doing this work are out there visible, to allow those I mean, it's not spontaneous exactly, but those evolving engagements.
Oh, that's beautiful. It just shows, doesn't it? It's continued conversation, not just, I don't know, a one-off campaign or something that someone might do.
And
Exactly.
visibility, you know, in person, online. I've been flyering the Peak District whilst teaching my son to drive. I'm like, I will take you out, but only if when we see a notice board, we stop.
I love that.
Multitasking.
Oh my goodness, it's so embedded into your everywhere you go. You're just gonna leave a flyer here.
But that's it, you know, like we were invited by a person that we work with as a supervisor for us, and she invited us to think more analog about the way that people find out about us. And you know, when you put in sort of work into having a website and having a place where people can land and get more information, but what about the stage before that, and how do people even get to know about us? And so we really talked about, you know, the opportunity that is notice boards.
Beautiful. Yeah, those notice boards. It's true, actually. I always stop at the notice board in our community.
Yeah, somebody said to me, nobody stops at that. I'm like, I stop at every
do.
single one. I'm so nosy.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, also it's quite a good pee spot for dogs. So my dog sort of got a bit of time.
Perfect.
But yeah, I definitely
Actually, we should flyer the dog poo bins.
We should.
Everybody's at those.
True.
Yeah.
True.
What a way to end.
What a way to end, exactly, flaring the dog poo bins. So before we complete, I would love for you to share how, I mean, I'm so grateful to have you in the digital orbit. But how can people find out more about your work, your offerings? What do you want to share in the space?
So probably the easiest way to start off is going to our website, which is www.deadgood.org. And on there, we try and keep it current and relevant, but it's a great space to see the story of us getting here, learn about our dad, why we started, how we started, to see what we offer, to see how much that might cost, to read some testimonials, to look at our death merch, and to see what we've got in our shop. I'm just about to drop a new batch of limited edition stickers, so they're going to be available to buy soon. But currently we've got kind of resources, death resources. We did used to sell clothing and bags, but because we are of ecological persuasion, that doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? We're sort of ecologically aware. It just felt like not the right thing to have more new stuff put out into the world. So we're going in a different direction, but our resources are our best-selling item. So our funeral planning kits are our best-selling item on our web shop. We've also got zines about how to shroud bodies and learning about things like that. So that's the place to start, but we've also got myriad social media, which I'll let Katy talk about.
So because of algorithms, we encourage people to sign up to the Mortal Portal, which is our regular way of staying in touch with people through Substack. So if you just Google the Mortal Portal, it'll bring it up, and you can subscribe for free. But we also have a paid option, which is a really great way for people to support our work if they love what we do, but don't need, any of our bigger offers. So yeah, the Mortal Portal is where we try to create imaginative think pieces, sometimes quirky, sometimes more considered, but you'll really feel like you know us if you subscribe to the Mortal Portal. And then we're on most social media, not TikTok, but everything else as Dead Good Legacies. And we can tell you right now, but like we're on the cusp of changing our name for trademark reasons.
Okay.
So we can't trademark Dead Good. So it's owned by a publishing house. So we are in the process of slightly pivoting. It'll still be recognisable as dead good, but
yes, we'll probably still call ourselves dead good, and people will call us dead good, but in the way that some people think we are dead good legacies because that's our handle, we're thinking of changing it, aren't we, Kate?
Yeah. But we're going to trademark it first before, just in case we're not allowed to trademark it, and then it would be silly to have said we're this and then we can't be it. But yeah, so we're 2 years old on Monday.
Congratulations.
So,
happy birthday.
Thank you. So it feels like a good time to do a few shifts around name and identity. But yeah, so currently we're Dead Good Legacies, but that may change next year.
Oh, watch this space for that next chapter, that emerging from the after the 2-year cocoon into what's transformational moment. Well, thank you both so much for such beautiful. I feel like there's going to be a part 2 at some point, because we got through about 3 of all of the questions that I wanted to ask, which is understandable, because we knew, as I think Katie, you said, this is probably an hour for each question. So we knew that was going to happen. So I would love to have you on in the future for another dead conversation. But in the meantime, just sending you both all of my gratitude for everything that you shared today. It's really, really fueled me creatively, and I'm so excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you. We've really enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting us.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside. And we'll never make it, and we'll never break it.